In English, there are two ways to construct a sentence. You either use active voice or you either use passive voice. So what are the difference between these two voices? In a very simple way to explain, active voice simply means the subject take control of the actions. However, in passive voice, the subject simply receive or affected by the action happen. There are some very important thing that you have to be aware when you are using passive voice. So today we are going to talk about the passive voice. Let's take a look in these example. Now, most sentences in English are active. Now, in active sentence, the subject is the person or things that does the action. In the other way round, they control the action. For example, the Chinese invented the game. The action invented is taken control by the subject, Chinese. However, in a passive sentence, the subject is the person or thing affected by the action. So people usually use the passive voice when action itself is more important than the person who did the action. In a lot of examples, people who write passive voice didn't actually care too much about who did the action. Instead, they actually focus on something affected to the subject of the sentence. Take a look at this following. The topic of passive voice will include modular verbs, and the passive voice example, the rules of the game can be learned. Okay, can be is a linking verb, and the word learned is an adjective. Aware about the usage of the color yellow. Many students confuse that when we are using passive voice, the color yellow is actually the verbs of the sentence. However, it isn't the case. For active sentences, that's true. The sentence actually has only one verb, and that verb is controlled by the subject. But however, in passive voice, it is really different. The color red is simply the linking verb, and the color red that in active voice will change to become an adjective. Let's take a look at these examples. Ready, get, set, go. Okay, so this is a passage about an ancient chess game, Go, okay, in China. Alright, so the first one is a linking verb. Believe is the yellow, and also the past continuous tense of the linking verb was being, and with the adjective plight. Were being is another past continuous tense followed with the yellow belt. And you will notice that in the adjective part, the color red changed to become a color yellow by changing the color yellow to participial phase. And you will notice that the color red that changed to become an adjective is actually using participial phase. Actually, the participial phase that we use is past participle. So there could be end with ed with regular verb, or irregular verb that is just like example built or learned. Let's take a look. Was invented is a past tense of the linking verb, verb to be, and invented is a regular verb of past participle, has been. Present perfect tense of linking verb, and the word polite using past participle So added ed, it's a vacular verb. Is taken, is known. Present tense of linking verb is, and past participle taken and known. It is called, and also again present tense with regular verb using past participle, and also is known. Is played, are placed, is surrounded, is captured, removed. So it's present tense, and the played, placed, surround, captured, removed. Past participle ended with ed, so it's a regular verb. And also some modular verb can be, cannot be, can be, and also the verb to be, and as well as the learned and beaten irregular verb using past participle, okay, and a being. Present continuous tense of the verb to be and developed will no doubt be, will be, okay, so it's a future tense with overtaken, that is an irregular verb. To understand passive voice, we have to understand when do we use passive voice when we write a sentence. There are several situations that we could consider to use passive voice. Let's take a look. What are they? When do we use the passive voice? Situation number 1. We use passive voice when we are more interested in the action instead of the doer. For example, this house was built in 1278. Isn't that amazing? So it is amazing about the house. It's so old. It doesn't really matter who built it. And the other situation is different. And the one who did the action is so obvious. So we don't have to mention who is it. Let's take a look. For example, the thief was arrested. Obviously, it's the police who arrest the thief. So the thief was arrested yesterday. We don't have to mention about the doer. And the other situation that we choose to use passive voice is we don't know who did it. Let's take a look at this situation. My bag was stolen. I didn't see who did it. So we don't even know who's the doer is. And that is another situation that could consider to use passive voice. Let's take a look. We also use the passive voice in situations when it might be insensitive or impolite to identify the doer. For example, instead of saying you made a mistake, we say a mistake was made. Now we know these 4 situations that we could apply passive voice. Then how to do it? We just do 4 steps and we could change a sentence that is using active voice to a sentence that is using passive voice. Let's take a look. Alright, how do I form passive sentences? Okay, now let's take a look. One of the active sentences in English follow pattern 3 is a blue, red, blue. A thief stole my bag. Okay, when we change an active sentence into a passive sentence, we make the following steps. Number 1, the object of the active sentence becomes the subject, my bag. Second, add the verb to be in the same sentences. My bag was from stole, which is a past tense, to was. We change the main verb into past participle. The main verb in the sentence that is using active voice is the word stole. And this is the past tense, but the past participle of the word stole is stolen. So we change stole to become stolen. And then my bag was stolen. If we want to mention who did it, we could use a prepositional phrase starting with by. So my bag was stolen by the thief. Very easy and very straightforward, right? There will be some more elements that we could consider when we are using passive voice. We will talk about this in the upcoming videos. Last time, we talked about how to change a sentence that is using active voice into a passive voice. Today, we are talking about different tenses. How to apply passive voice in different tenses. Let's take a look at the following example. This diagram is illustrating different tenses using passive voice. Let's take a look. Example. First of all, we take a look at example that is using active voice. Faye writes a book. And by changing the object to become a subject and the original color red turned to be a past participle acting as an adjective, and then the color red is what to be. Its MR was word. A book is written. If you want to mention who write this book, you can add an extra information by Faye. And past perfect tense, simple past tense, simple present tense, future tense, present perfect tense, present continuous tense, and past continuous tense. And for present perfect continuous, you have to be aware that in passive voice we seldom use present perfect continuous. At the same logic, we seldom use past perfect continuous in passive voice as well. Alright, then we further take a look at the diagram. This diagram is talking about all different tenses that we have from present times, future times, and time in the past. Okay, let's take a look. For present tense, a book is written. Okay, simply change the color red into its or am or are. Okay, and for present continuous tense, a book is being written by Faye. Change the is am are was word to become is being, and the past participle of the color red that we use in the active voice remain unchanged because we never change the different form of adjectives. Because we never change the form of an adjective. Then for future tense, a book will be written by Faye. Will be instead of is being or is am was word. Another way of using future tense in passive voice is a book is going to be written by Faye. Changing the color red to is going to be. And then how about past tense? A book was written. Changing is MR to was and remain unchanged with the part written. And then present perfect tense has been or have been for plural form. And the past participle written remain unchanged. Then how about past continuous tense? Past continuous tense is the same, just change is MR was word to was being written. And for in passive voice, we don't often use present perfect continuous tense. Alright, so that's right, you can ignore this. Then how about a tense happened before past tense? A book had been written. Past perfect tense. A book had been written. Alright, then again, we seldom use past perfect continuous tense in passive voice, so this one you can ignore. And a summary will be listed here in the document. And you can see different tenses actually using different form of verb to be. And the most important thing to every one of you is that remember the color red is the verb to be. Just simply change different form of verb to be when you are using different tenses. And the past participle will be unchanged. Today we talk about past tense of passive voice. Let's take a look at the following examples and 3 words. The word bond, bear, and bond. Let's take a look. Simple past and passive voice. We form passive statements in simple past tense like this. She was not invited to the party. They were not shown the painting. It's quite straightforward because we simply change the color red into was for singular nouns and also were for plural nouns. Okay, but there are 3 words that we have to bear in mind. The 3 words that we have to bear in mind: the word bond, bear, and the word bond. Let's take a look at these confusing words. When the verb bear, bond, and bond is used to talk about someone's birth, it's always in the passive voice, and the sentence should be always in the past tense. The word bond actually highly related to the word bear, and in a sense means give birth. And why is it so confusing? Let's take a look at the explanations. Bond is commonly used in the sense of the word bear, meaning to give birth. It is only used in passive voice without by. Example: I was born in Hong Kong. Was is the color red, and born is in color yellow. I born is not correct. I'm born in Hong Kong. I am born is not a proper use of the word born because other than passive voice, we actually use this sentence in past tense. That have to be bear in mind. How about the relationships between these 3 words? Bear, bond, and bond. Let's take a look. The difference between bond and bond. They are very confusing because both are past participle forms of the word bear. Bond mostly used in US and bond is in UK. Example: she was born in March of 1817. Born is used for some instances like referring, carrying something, especially for an idea or burden. Now example, there are several reasons for the current uprising that must be borne in mind. The spelling bonds occasionally used in passive voice in the to give birth sense. Example, a project was born of such personal trauma to emerge in a world that's so hungry for these kinds of stories. And the other word bore is a little bit more straightforward. Okay, because the word bore is expressing feeling, and we use passive voice like I feel bored or I am bored. Let's take a look. I'm very easily bored. Like this. When we form a question using passive voice, we should do in this way. Let's take a look. Form questions by changing the place of subject and its MR was where verb to be. Example, I pay well. Where they show the painting. In 2012 paper 2 exam, examiner illustrated a lot of students actually use passive voice in an improper way. Let's take a look what mistake they made. Last week our school was joined a music festival. It should be last week our school joined a music festival. The action join is actively controlled by the school. However, was drawing is inappropriate. And the other one, Mary was suffer from depression. We should actually use suffer from depressions in this sense. After we cover the past tense of the passive voice, today we talk about some other tenses. Let's take a look at the following examples. Present, past continuous, and the passive voice. Now, people form passive statements in present continuous tense like this. First part is are plus being or not being, and the past participle. Okay, the pool is being cleaned at the moment. And we form passive statement in the past continuous tense like this. The school was being renovated at the moment, or was not being renovated. Then how about set up a question? How do we do? Let's take a look. In questions, the subject and the color red is was were change places. We move the verb to be from sticking together with being to the front of the sentence. Is the pool, okay, or are the students being, and the color yellow remain unchanged. Then after present and past continuous, let's take a look at the future tense. Future forms and the passive voice. We form passive statement with will, like this. Will or will not be invited to the party. Okay? And one thing to remember, we can also use simple present or present continuous to talk about the future. Example, the auditions is held next Tuesday. I'm being given a tour of the school next weekend. Or I am not going to be given a scholarship. Or we are not going to be accepted by the school. However, that is something we have to be cautioned. We don't use future continuous tense in passive voice. But in question, the subject will or is and are will change place like this. Will I be? Am I going? Okay? This one. And this one. Then after the future tense, we could now go to present and past perfect tense. Let's take a look. Present, past perfect, and the passive voice. People form passive statements in the present perfect tense like this. Has been or has not been chosen for the leading role. Now, one thing we have to bear in mind, present perfect continuous and past perfect continuous will not be used in passive voice. Let's take a look at the questions type. In question, the subject have, has, had changed place. And we form the passive statements in past perfect tense like this. Has he been chosen for the leading role? Why have they been arrested? Today, we're gonna talk about two topics of passive voice. Number one, verb that doesn't follow any objects, they won't have any passive form. And the other one, verbs that follow two objects. Let's get started. Verbs not used in passive voice. There are some verbs that cannot be used in passive sentences. Now, the following groups are verbs that don't have passive form. The first group, intransitive verbs, verbs which don't have objects. For example, die, before happened. Now remember, the object in an active sentence becomes the subject in a passive sentence. That's why if a verb that has no object, it cannot have a passive form. For example, the word die, he died. Because the verb die is an intransitive verb, so we can't say he was died. There are more intransitive verbs: appear, collapse, collide, disappear, emerge, lie, look, occur, rise, sleep, vanish. The other group, most state verbs. Let's take a look. And other groups of verbs that do not have a passive form. Most state verbs, verbs which refers to states, no actions, will also have no passive form. For example, feet, have, resemble, suit. The third one, verbs that the doer is more important. Doer means the one who do the action. Let's take a look. Also, if the doer, that means the one who did the action, is more important in a sentence, we also do not have a passive voice. Let's take a look. What are they? Verbs where the doer is more important. For example, escape, let, survive. The dog escaped the fire. We emphasize on the subject, the dog. So, the fire was escaped by the dog seems a little bit strange. Another one, the crew survived the accident. Also, the crew is a very important point. Is a very important element that is a very important element in the sentence. The accident was survived by the crew. It seems a little bit strange. Another one, my dad let me drive his car. I was let to drive my dad's car. It seems a little bit strange. I was allowed to drive my dad's car is equivalent to my dad allowed me to drive his car. So here, these two, active voice and passive voice, are the same. Some very useful grammar terms, the difference between transitive verb and intransitive verbs. Let's take a look. Transitive verbs have object. Intransitive verbs do not have an object. Compare with the following two sentences. He killed him. Him is an object, so kill is a transitive verb. He died. We cannot say she died him. So, die is an intransitive verb following no object, no color blue. Verbs that follow two objects, the direct object as well as the indirect object. Let's take a look. What are they? How about verbs that have two objects followed? Let's take a look. Some verbs, for example, give, lend, offer, pay, promise, send, show, tell. They can have two objects, direct object and indirect object. Now, either object can be changed into the subject of a passive sentence. For example, our teachers gave students who failed the test extra homework. What actually the teacher gave is extra homework. So extra homework is the direct object. And who get these homework? Students who get the homework will be the indirect object. So we can form a sentence in passive voice like this. Extra homework was given to students who failed the test. So you can see here we highlight who failed the test is a relative clause telling you more about students, which is a yellow. Students who failed the exam were given extra homework. The original subject, our teacher, is not very important, so we don't actually given this information in the passive voice sentences. Now, be careful, because when we change the structure of these sentences, we often need to add or remove prepositions as well as to change the pronouns. In other words, the overlaps are we found. Okay, Well, actually, they offer refund. Who received these direct object? It is the us, and the word offer is a color red. So we were offered a refund, and a refund was offered. So these two will be similar. We have talked about different usage of passive voice. Today we talk about modal verbs and the passive voice. Let's take a look. Now, people use modal verbs in passive voice usually for possibility, permission. For example, this suitcase can be converted into a backpack, and the other one, a hard hat should be worn at all times. People use modal verbs in active voice by giving instructions, set up rules, or other purposes. Let's take a look at the following examples. Passive sentences with modal verbs are often used in instructions, orders, rules, when we want to focus on what should be done rather than who should do it. Also, people use modal must, ought to, and should, as well as have to, in these sentences. For example, the alarm must be turned off before the door is opened. We also use modal verbs in passive voice by giving announcement or some other similar purposes. Let's take a look at the following examples. People often use modal verbs in passive voice by giving out announcements, notice, and signs. Examples: all applications should be submitted by 23rd June. Some discomfort may be experienced during the operation. So, how do I form a sentence in passive voice with modal verbs? Let's take a look. We form passive statements with modal verbs like this. He should not or should be given. Modal verb should follow with verb to be, and plus a past participle given. Should be given a warning. Then how about making a question in passive voice with modal verbs? Let's take a look. In passive questions with modal verbs, subject and modal verb change places. By he should be become should he be, and the past participle given will be possessed at the same place. Should he be given a warning, or shouldn't he be given a warning? That's all for today. Like this video and subscribe to our channel. See you next time. Goodbye.